This next fireside chat on the power of leaders in the boardroom seeks to celebrate and honor the indomitable spirit of women who have not only ascended to influential positions, but have also redefined the narrative of corporate leadership. Through their determination, acumen, and resilience, they have proven that the boardroom is a place where diversity thrives and innovation flourishes. May I now welcome on stage Ms. Naina Kidwai, Chairperson, India Sanitation Coalition and former country head HSBC India. Big round of applause, please, for her. Naina Kidwai is the chairman of Rothschild India. She has been the past president of Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry and retired in December 2015 as an executive director on the board of HSBC Asia Pacific and chairman HSBC India. She chairs the Primary Markets Advisory Committee of the SEBI. She is a member of the Indo-ASEAN Business Council, the Army Group Insurance Funds Investment Advisory Committee, the Harvard Business School's South Asia Advisory Board, Standard Chartered Bank's International Advisory Council, and the Mission Board of EQT Future Fund. And amongst many, she has also served as a member of the Government of India's Industry Task Force and the Prime Minister's Trade and Industry Council. And joining her on stage is Sucharita Kukreti, Senior Anchor and Editor, Republic Media Network. Over to you, Sucharita.
Thank you so much, Rakshita, and an absolute privilege to be sharing a seat with you, Ms. Kidwai, today. And the session is aptly called Power of Leaders in the Boardroom, and I feel like one merely sitting by you, alongside you, ma'am, today, because you've been a leader all your life, and such a privilege to have you on stage today. I would like to begin by asking, ma'am, most of us today in the hall are working women. We know women who are working. But what really holds them back from taking up leadership positions and more significantly boardroom positions? Because a recent EY report also says there's less than 5% of Nifty 500 companies have women chairpersons. So what really holds them back from taking up those boardroom positions, ma'am?
So let me start by first of all congratulating Republic TV to pick up on this important theme. I think Stree Shakti is so critical for our country's progress. And the more conversations we have on this subject, the better for India, let alone for us women who would like to thrive in our country. So women, whether in the boardroom or in a self-help group, in microfinance, what we need first and foremost is a safe environment. A safe environment to come and go from work, a safe environment to work in, and then the right ecosystem which enables us to thrive. And that right ecosystem depends on where you are in your work. So the right ecosystem in a company is to ensure equality of pay. When I was, in fact, starting work, it even mattered in terms of where the toilets were. I could assess a company's barometer of what importance they gave a woman based on where the toilets were. Because when I joined, I would have to go up 3 floors each time, which is not easy when you're pregnant and having your first baby, but 3 floors to access a toilet. So we have come a long way. At least now you have the toilets maybe right behind the Xerox machine or whatever, but at least women's toilets in the corporate world have happened. So it is a barometer of progress. So like that, today the initiatives and many of the bigger companies, maybe less so at the MSME and smaller companies level, tick the boxes of, so maternity leave, paternity leave, at least 6 months, sabbaticals, do you have a women's network, do you have a creche, etc. And those tick boxes, I think, by and large, are beginning to happen. The culture of the company, beyond the tick box, is what I always suggest to women who come to me to assess. Is that environment truly one where you, as a woman, are going to be allowed to thrive? That you can take charge and really rise to your level of competence. And that is a subtle difference between the tick box and the culture. And I think our companies need to do a better job of making that ecosystem one which is truly equal and which supports the women and the talent therein. At the grassroots level, the self-help groups, the microfinance effort that is on in the country today, it's, again, an ecosystem, but it requires different skills, different mentoring, teaching skill sets, often to women who are not very literate, giving them digital tools so they can progress. So we have to cut this according to the cloth that we are trying to shape. And at every level, women will progress if we get the right ecosystem for them.
For my audiences, ma'am has authored a book called 30 Women in Power, Their Voices, Their Stories. Ma'am, I think, would you tell us, can you share a few learnings from that book? It's important to know how women who've been working have managed work-life balance along with leading to those leadership positions, the boardroom positions. Is that difficult? It must have been difficult, and you've written about it.
So I picked 30 women in power, mostly CEOs of companies across sectors, including media and IT, technology. There was a time where most of our MNC tech firms, multinational tech firms in India were headed by women. None of the Indian ones, but the foreign ones. And it was not really well known that that was the case. Everyone just celebrated the bankers, but forgot everything else. And that is why I felt the book was important. There were, interestingly, common learnings despite the variety of industries that I covered. I also picked 3 NGOs and 3 people from the services, the IAS, IFS. And the common learnings were inevitably that every one of these women had a passion for what they were doing, their work. So it is about enjoying what you do, which makes you give your all. Integrity. The women with one voice believed that integrity in dealing, and not just in terms of moral courage, but also in terms of ideas. If you believe in something, your integrity should be one to stand by that idea. So the courage and integrity were very important. I mean, otherwise, the fact that hard work was a given, that came from the passion. It also came, I think, from many of us of a generation who women who sadly believed we did need to be twice better than the guys in our roles. So we always worked harder in order to prove ourselves, always feeling like a bit of a goldfish in a bowl. I fear that syndrome still remains. Women today are watched more closely. When we fall, we are noticed more. But this is, I think, changing. It hasn't changed enough, but it is something we have to live with. So other than this ambition, now ambition was seen as a bad thing in women. It is probably one which gets noticed, but for every one of these women, quiet ambition was important. They had the ambition to succeed, they worked at it, they were very focused in terms of understanding that they wanted to get to the next level. You don't dream of being CEO the day you join a firm, but at every stage you're at, you look a little over the parapet and say, well, I could do that too. And so it's multiple steps, but it is one that keeps driving you ahead in an organization. The biggest lesson was how to deal with failure, because fail we will. So how do you pick yourself up when you fall? And I like to quote from nature here. I'm deeply engaged and involved in things to do with wildlife and the environment. And I'm happy to say that there is a syndrome called the law of wasted effort. So you think about it. Lions will actually fail 60% of the time when they hunt. That doesn't stop them from hunting. If you think of rain, most of it will flow down into the sea. We only catch so little of it. You think of fish and the eggs that they lay, maybe 10% will grow into fish. nature lives with the law of wasted effort, but it doesn't stop doing that same thing. Why do we, as thinking human beings, get so disheartened when we fail? Let's learn from those lessons. Let's push it aside. Let's move ahead. And this dealing with failure was a very important theme across many of the women CEOs. And I would just add to that my own experience of all the naysayers. When I wanted to go to business school, all the uncles in the family, very traditional North Indian family, prevailing on my mother to say, going off to the US, how can you let her go? You should be getting her married, etc. The naysayers were the ones that actually put my back up, made me fight. So I was out to prove how wrong they were. And at every level, if you convert that negative energy around you into your positive to help you fight that very conjecture that you are not ready for it, that very thought that you should not do it, you find your own strength and it enables you to keep changing. The same women, they talk about what you've heard earlier today in terms of the backup systems, the family, the parents. There was one of the women, Aruna Jayanti, who was the head of one of the tech firms at the time, talked about how she used her professor at Stanford when she was studying there to babysit her kid. Arundhati Bhattacharya was chair of State Bank of India, asked and often had help from neighbors who looked after the kids. And then, of course, it's the traditional support systems of mothers and mothers-in-law. Many of the women relied on the mother-in-law. So the importance here of having a mother-in-law who you aren't fighting with, but supports you, and we were just discussing that earlier. You have a mother-in-law at home that has enabled you to come to work, but those institutions become the support systems, and most important, your life partner, your spouse, your husband. That is a career decision. Without that support, you can never get to where you want to go.
I would like to tell the audiences that even the informal session that I had with Ms. Kidwai right before this session was as inspiring. And ma'am, you were just talking about how women were made to feel guilty about being ambitious. The men were supposed to be ambitious, but the women were made to feel guilty. Do you think that has changed over the years, or there's still a lot more to do on that front?
You know, I think it's changed in that there is at least support from family, from parents, and fathers who have that sense of ambition. And again, alluding to my book, the fathers were very important figures in all those careers. So where you had fathers who believed in their children and believed in their girls, you got that progress. So the ambition that parents are bringing to their girls is important. But at work, I fear that an aggressive woman, a woman who's pushing her career, is still not maybe respected and is not maybe understood as well as a guy who's doing the same thing. And I think we, as leaders, have to recognize that we want our women to be ambitious, we want them to be aggressive, we want them to control their careers. I mean, I would be stunned how the guys would just pop out of their offices when I just walk from my office to the loo. And the women who could have followed me into the loo didn't come with me. So the other side of it is women maybe don't always push enough. We don't seize the opportunities. And we have to help to make sure that women take charge of their careers and demand and command a presence as they do it.
We're a hall full of working women, and we together can do that. We can seize the opportunity, ma'am. Yeah. Very inspiring. But, ma'am, there is also the call for an increased representation of women in boardroom positions. Do you think the dynamics of an organization changes when there are women at the top?
I think certainly, because people do look to see who those women are and how they deal with things. How they are respected in an organization, but it is not enough. So that's the sort of walk the talk at the top. But people leave because they have bad managers. That is the single largest reason given typically for people who leave an organization. So you have managers at all levels. At a call center, your manager would be a middle-level manager. How does that person lead? How does that person mentor? How does that person create the right environment is very important. So leadership at every level becomes important. But I think having leadership at the top certainly helps. The organization I took over as CEO of the bank, at the top layer was all men. So my entire team, when I got appointed as CEO, were men. By the time I left, 30% were women, because I was able, fortunately, to identify some of the roles where we brought in women from outside, but also plucked some from within the company to become what were some of the best in their fields, even lauded today. However, for those guys, I have no idea how they felt about me. They had to just suck it up. But the fact is that they needed sensitizing to the women that worked with them. So I set up work groups where women, typically all middle managers, were created into groups of 7 and 8 under each one of them, in the hope that they would learn how the women think. And we had what was a diversity and inclusion program for the women to identify in different subjects what was needed in the organization. And from that experience came one of the most interesting innovations in banking, in that we reduced our workday to 5 days. Imagine, in India, we had a 6-day work week in banks. Whole organization came in for half a day on Saturday. So we switched to a 5-day week because this simple idea, which was staring us in the face, had not struck any of us till it took these women in these working groups to say, well, how about a 5-day week? We kept the branches open on the 6th day with a roster, and the whole bank therefore benefits from the 5-day week. We increased everything by half an hour, basically told everyone that if this does not work, if productivity drops, we have a 6-month window, and then the bosses are going to take us back to a 6-day week. So everyone worked harder, and it became a huge success. And all my competition who was calling, having a laugh on the side that, you know, this is one of your mad experiments, have all shifted to a 5-day week. It took some 2 years to do it, but they all ended up doing it. And meanwhile, we raked it in, the women joined us. So leadership at the top can mean you sensitize an organization. In a way, it helps you. So the talent comes in your direction. The women who want to work and who are truly good feel, this is the company, this is the bank I want to join, because it's a better place for me to be. And I think creating that brand for ourselves as companies can really benefit us, because we then attract the talent. And from what I understand, you at Republic TV have a senior leadership at the top. I was just hearing from Suchrita, and that's probably why you will continue to attract talent such as her. Yeah.
Ma'am, the gender gap report by the World Economic Forum paints a very sobering picture of gender parity, and India also ranks relatively low on it. What are the steps do you think can be taken to bridge this gap in the various sections of the society? Very, very important.
So this is a big question, and one which we have to work hard at. But the one area I think we can tackle, and tackle very well in our country, is the digital divide. In fact, it was a very big theme at the G20 Women's Ministerial event in Gandhinagar, which I spoke on digital skilling. And it had a lot of resonance across countries, big and small. Because world statistics tell you that the boy in the family is more likely to have access to the smartphone. It's not just India. And then in the developing world, it gets even worse, where access to the internet is something which women and young girls have far less than the boy in the family. And in fact, that differential can be as much as 1.8 times. So it's a global phenomenon accentuated in the developing world, including countries such as us. So here we are building this amazing internet and digital stack in the country. 40% of all global digital transactions happen in India. We have one of the most successful digital payment mechanisms anywhere in the world. We are marching ahead as a digital nation. And here's where, if our women get left behind, if our women cannot avail of these benefits, it would be one of the worst ever tragedies of our time. So empowering our women with the technology, yes, that window to the smartphone, and maybe we need booths in every city in the days like when we had these EPBX phone booths, and we did have that because there was a shortage of phone lines in the country in my lifetime, that we create access to the internet. Then we have to teach the skills. And I have seen, working at a very grassroots level with organizations like SEVA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, through COVID, they made this digital leap because they got taught how to read and understand designs on the computer, and they were able to copy those designs and then taught how to sell the product through the digital process and get paid on digital payment. And these are relatively illiterate women. So the beauty of the digital process is, and if we can go to voice and digital, think about it. Our women can leapfrog from being at home, unable to read, to having livelihoods, as indeed Seva taught these women, on being able to just see pictures on a computer and work and go ahead, through to actually then managing their money, because they all understand money, but being able to do it digitally, being able to access their bank accounts, which they often have bank accounts, but don't actually operate them. So we have to go the whole way in terms of that digital training. And it isn't difficult, but it's something we have to put our minds to. So I'm very passionate about the whole digital thing. For each one of us, I mean, myself, our generation, we have a lot of learning to do as well. How can we ensure that we are always tech and digital ready? And by the way, at FICCI, and we announced this at the G20, one of the contributions of India to the world is the Tech Equity Platform, which was put together by Intel for us. And I would urge you all to go there. And there's training there at all levels on digital training for women. And the purpose of this is that we all upskill ourselves to be ready for the future. And we need more such initiatives.
Ma'am, from what you said, you think there is still a difference in earning your money and having access to that money, especially for women in India? Because when you speak about financial prowess, and you also speak about the digital platforms to be able to access that money that you earn, I think that adds to the financial independence for women, because it's a different thing to be earning, and it's a different thing to be able to have access to that money, as you said, especially for women in India, even now.
Women do quite well about managing the money, whether they hide it under their beds or stick it somewhere under a pan. But they, in fact, interestingly, when demonetization happened, this was a very interesting feature that emerged, because women were producing notes from all over the place, which they weren't able to explain to their husbands. So women will manage their money. We would just rather that they put it in a bank account so they can learn to invest it as well. And many of the government's programs and the funding is coming directly into the banks. So for them to be able to manage and hold that bank account and not have their husbands access it would be important. And I think that's a tough space for many women. We actually only recently, in a program that I was looking at that Seva's implemented, excellent loan program available for women coming out of COVID, etc. Accessing it, the loans, was a big issue because even though it was set up that the banks, the local banks, help them with the forms and dispensation of these loans, they were not comfortable going in to get that support, largely because the banks were somewhat dismissive about that whole process. So access is not easy. We can announce great programs, but how that last divide of how you make that woman available and enable her to access what is being provided her, the money in the bank account for her to control it, the ability to get a loan when she has problems filling out a form, are all parts of the areas we do have to address.
Ma'am, do you think that acceptance of a woman leader has a lot to do with societal upbringing? I'm sure you would agree. Because leaders are leaders. There are no women leaders or male leaders. Leaders are leaders. And I think that needs to be told right at the childhood level.
Absolutely. And I actually think that it's those first few years that are the hardest, because once you become sort of a leader, say in 10 years, you are there and recognized for your skill. And it's much easier because you can dictate, you are treasured by the company, you don't really worry about the man-woman issue as much as making sure that you are delivering as a manager, as a leader in the organization, and your skills stand up for themselves. It is those early and more formative years where you can get disillusioned if you're in an organization that doesn't support you, that doesn't allow you to grow. It's once you're heading companies or even heading a division. I mean, I was just 30, almost 30, when I was heading the merchant bank for Grindlay's Bank, where I was working. And at that level, it didn't matter. My customers were were men, typically. They had a problem in the first 5 minutes. That was their problem. Yeah? And the minute I sensed that they were uncomfortable with me, I made sure that I worked hard to dispel that discomfort, but didn't tolerate bad behavior either. So you can be tough once you're in a position to be tough. But the journey we have to help women in is that early part, that getting there. And have to have policies, you know, whistleblower policies, sexual harassment policies, etc., where women can come out about issues that affect them and that these can be nipped in the bud.
Ms. Kidwai, at this point, I would like to tell you that you see a lot of women sitting here. We at Republic are a very strong woman force. We work together, and I take pride in that fact. Do you think that your fellow women workers can be your biggest strength at work?
Absolutely. I think that sisterhood is so important, and that is why many companies have set up women's networks. Some companies saw a bit of a backlash because the guys began to feel excluded and wondered why it was there. So they opened it up for guys to come and join, and you would get a smattering of guys, usually from HR, who would come and sit in on these sessions. And then over time, some of the women began to pull their male colleagues in as well. These women's networks are important. And I actually do not believe the view that often prevails that women managers and leaders do not help other women. I have grown up in organizations where I have seen how women who worked with me, worked for me, helped others. So a lot depends on the culture of the organization. I don't think women are soft on other women. I think that may be why some women feel women are not sensitive to them, because by and large, the rules that prevail apply to everyone. But I think that too is part of the training, that we are not working because we want special favor. We may want adjustment, we may want flexi hours, but we're not saying we're going to work less or contribute less, or that we want to be treated too differently from the guys. All the women that we surveyed, and I would do these health checks all the time, would always say, we don't want quotas. We don't want anything special. We just want to be treated the same, enabling us to deliver and be recognized for what we deliver. Having said that, I think women do need a helping hand because they tend to push less. They don't necessarily seize opportunities that men do. We know for a fact that if there's a job, a guy will put his hand up when he's only 30% prepared. A woman who's 90% ready for the job is still wondering, can I do it? Should I do it? So those differences we have to cater to and help women to seize the opportunity. But I do think that organizations that have women, and once you're beyond a certain percentage, you're not just standing out there on your own, there is a sisterhood, which is very important. And that sisterhood becomes even more important when you look at the grassroots. If you look at what Seva does,
absolutely,
it's so critical that the village as a whole, when the women start to work, if it's one woman who takes a foot forward, she's going to get bashed up by her husband. But when the women as a whole move together to say, we want economic empowerment, we are going to be ready for the training that is being provided, the village itself changes. So that sisterhood becomes very, very important.
Ms. Kidwai, I spoke about your book that you've authored, 30 Women in Power, Their Voices, Their Stories. What do you think has been the single most important factor that has led to the rise of women in corporate boardrooms?
So, of course, one is that woman herself, her talent, her passion, her ability to steer her career. The other is, I think, the ones of us who made it because we had support. And that support came from all quarters. Inevitably from the family, immediate family, as I mentioned, husband, mothers-in-law, fathers, in that order. But also, if we were lucky, and they were typically male bosses, the male boss who also extended a helping hand. And sometimes it came from the most unusual quarters. I mean, I was in Grindlay's Bank when it got taken over by ANZ, an Australian bank, and I thought, oh gosh, you know, the Aussies, they're male chauvinistic, this organization is going to be very different to work in. The biggest helping hand I got in my career was from the then country head of India, who was an Australian. And I was so wrong because individuals and bosses and men in different places are amazing and often, of course, a surprise, but they rise to the occasion. And in his case, he gave me a job at which I had asked to move from corporate banking to retail banking. And for bankers, you will understand you're going from working the corporate sector to a role which was typically run by gray-haired people who had been doing retail banking, understood banking systems. Because I believed I needed to do something different, so I was getting myself ready to, you know, be a general manager and a CEO. The guy who gave me that opportunity was this guy. Because when I told him this is my aspiration, he found the role for me. And the day he gave me the job, I had discovered only the previous day that I was pregnant. And the job I was given was to open offices around the world to direct NRI, non-resident Indian money, back to India. And so here I am now hesitating. I didn't dare tell him why I was hesitating. I go home, discuss it with my husband, and obviously go back the next day and have to tell the boss, look, only my husband and parents know, I've just learned I'm pregnant. And I could see he almost fell off his chair, didn't know quite how to respond. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to take the chance. And they gave me the job. I could have been flat out on my bed 3 months later. I have never worked harder. I worked till my 8th month. I felt that as in travel till my 8th month, work right through my pregnancy. He was the guy who put the faith in me. So sometimes we have this, we create glass barriers where they don't exist. We think we can't do it. We think a boss is not going to be supportive. And look how wrong I was.
So true, ma'am. And I think that is such an inspiring thought that you've just told us all. A lot of members of the audience would want to ask you a few questions because yours has been an inspirational journey. If we could just take the first question for ma'am, Ms. Kidwai.
The first ones are always the brave ones.
The first ones are always brave ones. Okay. Oh, okay. So the journey for women up to the boardroom comes from a man who's leading the boardroom, but with exceptional women in there.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me, ma'am? Yes. First of all, I just want to say that, yours is a truly remarkable journey. Personal courage. You've been very unconventional in everything that you've done. You've been a path breaker, and I know that when you entered the corporate world, it was maybe 10 years before liberalization as we know it. So you've seen the ups and downs of the Indian economic system. So remarkable journey, and thank you for coming to our dialogues. Ms. Kidwai, my question is about a comment you had made earlier. At one point you had said that you don't believe in the quota system. And you were talking in the context of Indian politics and the public space. You said that we don't need quotas, at least in legislative bodies. And I have seen as a reporter the amount of bias and prejudice which was there. When, as a reporter, we used to report on the Women's Reservation Bill, we saw some of the most sexist comments being made very openly 15 to 20 years back in Parliament by senior leaders about women wanting to enter Parliament. So there was a very strong chauvinism. Recently, however, you have said that you've changed your views on the need for quotas. And I want to ask you why you've changed your views. Earlier you felt that women do not need quotas in Parliament or in legislative bodies. But recently you have said that you have changed your view. So I'd like you to share why you've changed your view.
So this is always the danger of having Arnab in a room. He researches these things and comes up with these difficult questions. Yeah? So I initially believed, like a lot of the women who worked with me, that when you have quotas, even though you are capable and you've got the job because you're capable, the organization believes you got it because you were a woman, because that quota had to be filled. So you actually lose out in terms of the respect you otherwise command because you're actually up for the job because you're capable. And so when I set the policies at the bank, I made it very futuristic in saying by 2020, this was way back in 2006, we will have 30% women across all categories. So you made it a direction, you nudged the organization in that direction, didn't have quotas. So that was me. I realized that it takes too long. And I've seen the success of the regulation for women on boards, where we were in the sort of 4-5% level till the regulation made it mandatory to have one woman on the board. And one woman is, it's still a disgraceful one. We should be at 30%. But the direction was not just set in my sort of futuristic way, but it was mandatory. And we're now at 20% women in boards of the listed companies, the ones that are required to have it. And that journey happens in a short period of 3 to 4 years because we do it. We did the same in the Panchayati reservation, where, yes, it got misused. Yes, you got the women who were propped up by their husbands, as we know. But research has also shown that after she is re-elected for a second term, she comes into her own. She's no longer just there as a voice piece for her husband who's working behind the scenes through her. So I think if we have to jumpstart from a very low level, the quota becomes critical. And critical mass is important because, some of us just got used to it. It was like water off a duck's back, being the only woman in a room, having to stand up for your rights, etc. But being the only woman on a board is not the easiest thing for a lot of people. So we do need, in this creation, and hence the reservation, 1/3, etc., becomes important, is a critical mass and a sisterhood in there, which then is supportive, where it's no longer an issue of you're the lone woman making a statement. And the change that also has to come is women's issues aren't just about women raising them. So at the boards I'm on, after I've raised the issue a couple of times, I then begin to kick the guys into saying, where the hell are you on this? And the achievements that come from making sure the men ask the same question that you would have normally done, but you give them the question to ask it, is it about change? Because suddenly the ownership and the fight becomes for everyone as a whole. And I think, therefore, the quota helps because you get to a critical mass beyond which it won't matter, because women are just there. They're part of the landscape. They're not special. They're not that one voice. And the other is we will get there, but it's going to take so long that we have to jumpstart it today. So maybe a quota, which then goes away.
Ma'am, I'd just like to add to that because, like I said, a recent EY report says that about 95% of Nifty 500 companies have a woman board member, but only less than 5% have a woman chairperson. So why this stark gap, that transition from a board member to a woman leading the pack?
It will happen. I think the chairs of these boards, it's a question of time. Women on boards have been so few. Because initially, everyone said, we only want women CEOs, and there were only that many. It was inexplicable in some way, because every guy who came on the board was not a CEO. Every guy who came on the board came on a board for the first time, but they would say, no, we want women who've done board duties before. So once people got a little used to the fact that, hey, you just have to do it, it changed. So now, typically, a person who goes to chair a board will either be from the family, in which case families now have to, and are picking their girls. And you see some of those chairs coming from families, maybe because they didn't have sons, but are indeed appointing their daughters to chair. But for those of us who come in from the professional world, once you're on a board, you begin to be in line to be vice chair and chair, because of the experience. So I think you will see that now, because as the body of women on boards grows, there will be, over time, the chairs coming from those organizations.
Ma'am, so much to learn from this enlightening session with you. You've been a leader. All right, ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just changed my question because you mentioned about the Gram Panchayat. I'm asking this question because I come from I'm measuring the waters of two different worlds. So while we see personalities like you at the helm of affairs, I'm working with the remotest of the communities, be it in Ladakh, Munshiari, Panchachuli, or even in the Northeast with the women artisans. And while there's a disparity, very big disparity that we see in two areas. One, in the opportunity, existence of the opportunity. Second, is even being aware of your own capabilities, where women are conditioned to believe that they can only move if they're supported. And then it's a huge long journey, which we feel is, we've been talking about it to the tier 1 or tier 2 cities. So how do you look at this disparity that's existing in our country or even in other worlds? While we've been, as a faith-based leader, I've been working alongside the UN lines and figuring out how to bridge that gap, but we'd like to know your opinion on that.
And, I'd started by saying we have to cut the solutions according to the cloth. And clearly, when you're looking at grassroots India, the issues are different. In that, I should say the issues are the same, but then the answers and the tackling of it have to be different. And one of those ways is the digital process and empowerment of women through that. The other, I think, is what is one of the most exciting journeys our country is on, is the self-help group movement, which government is supporting, but was really discovered by the microfinance sector. And it's a sector which I have worked with and in for the last 30 years. And it is at a wonderful inflection point, very mature right now, where women are already combined into groups, particularly in rural India. It's less successful in the urban context. And these women stand guarantee for each other when they take loans. And initially the loans are taken, as you know, for, wedding in the family, illness, education, etc. But the real training that should come is to help these women and to repay the loans is livelihood. So giving them livelihoods, teaching them a skill is not difficult because the ability then to pay the loan increases, but they themselves become economically empowered. And I've seen how quickly it happens. Microfinance institutions that have understood this, set up like they call it a management school, taught these women how to trade their vegetables with using a mobile phone to just get the prices from surrounding mandis. The woman who just stitched petticoats for her village then employs 25 women through her skills and is able to market her petticoats in the surrounding village. So just showing them the way, basic financial skills, how to make money, how to save it, how to arrange their lives around an economic process that works for them. But it's not easy because they don't get the support systems we can afford. So when a Seva woman does her embroidery, she doesn't understand a date target easily. She's embroidering whenever she has free time. But can she then deliver the product the way we need it in an e-commerce world is the challenge. Does she stitch with the same thread of high quality that you need? Because when she's going from home, the input she has should be of the quality that delivers a product which organizations like you can support and sell across the world. So those inputs, those trainings are what people like yourselves become very critical for. So really glad to know you do what you do.
Ma'am, an absolute privilege to be hosting this session with you, and a very, very inspiring talk, and so much to take back home, ponder over, and learn from. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kidwai and Sucharita, for that wonderful session and very engaging and insightful session here.